a lot of it is quite impulsive. If there is a strategy there, it's maybe, he says different things. He contradicts himself quite often, and it's to keep people on their toes. First of all, it was 145% tariffs on China. Now there are negotiations that are going to be going on in the next days between the US and China. So I think maybe that is part of the strategy, but I don't think it's producing the results yet that they hoped it would.
Keir Starmer, he's going to join European leaders in Kyiv as calls intensify for Russia to agree a ceasefire. And it comes as Moscow marked the 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany today, with President Putin presiding over a parade of Russian military strength in an event attended by more than 20 world leaders, including the Chinese Premier Xi Jinping and the Brazilian President Lula. So what does this tell us about the direction the world is headed in, this so-called multipolar world, and how President Trump, who says he's a friend of Putin and Xi, how he might respond to these developments? Let's speak to Angela Stent, a former US National Intelligence Officer on Russia and a former Senior Nato Adviser. Angela, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
We've seen so many of these meetings in recent months in London, in Brussels and Paris, but they seem to go no further than stirring statements of support, statements of intent, coalition of the willing, we're going to give you more money. Apart from the fact that this one's going to be in Kyiv, what more can we expect from this gathering?
So I think continued expressions of support for Ukraine. It's clear that Russia really has no interest in coming to a peace settlement at the moment. What Putin's mainly interested in is these negotiations with Donald Trump and his representative and, restoring U.S.-Russian relations to a situation that they probably haven't been in since the 1990s. But I suppose it's very important for the European leaders to try and be on one page about what this coalition of the willing would mean, what they're prepared to give Kyiv, and whether, if there is some kind of a ceasefire and a peace settlement, that they would actually be willing to put boots on the ground there to give security guarantees to Ukraine that it will desperately need to make sure that Russia doesn't invade again if there is a peace settlement.
It's pretty alarming, isn't it, Angela, that after more than half a dozen such meetings, they're still not on the same page on some of these fundamental matters. Where do you think the fault lines remain?
So, the UK, I think, is willing to give more robust assistance, although Prime Minister Starmer has said that, in fact, the British wouldn't send boots on the ground as a kind of stabilization force. The French are enthusiastic about it. The new German government claims that it is also more enthusiastic about giving this kind of support to Kyiv. The Baltic states obviously are, and the Poles are. And then you start to get different countries that are less enthusiastic. On one side, on the extreme side, you have Viktor Orban's Hungary that doesn't want to support Ukraine at all. And also Robert Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovakia. He was one of the two European leaders that actually showed up in Moscow today, the other one being the Serbian leader, Vučić. But of course, Serbia is neither in NATO or the European Union. And then in between that, you have countries who are willing to support Ukraine, but not to do nearly as much as some of the larger European countries are. And then, of course, you have movements inside countries, the AfD in Germany, the extreme right-wing party there being most prominent, but the French extreme right, and in Britain too, the Reform Party and other populist parties in Europe who also don't want to support Kyiv.
Right, but how much notice is Putin, or indeed Trump, who says he's a friend, he knows him very well, how much notice are they likely to take of another call for a ceasefire from these European leaders? The fact that they're making it in Kyiv during a 3-day Russia-imposed ceasefire, well, how far does that go?
Well, I think Putin doesn't take very much of this seriously. He's very focused, laser focused on the U.S., and he's still calculating that the U.S. is interested enough, the Trump administration, in improving ties and doing business with Russia, that it's not going to, that it's not going to listen to what the Europeans say, although would like the Europeans to be involved in supporting Kyiv after there is a peace settlement. So I think Putin won't take much notice. I think the Trump administration administration will, but I think it's largely excluded Europe so far from any direct say in these peace negotiations that have been carried out just between the US and Russia and the US and Ukraine.
How alarmed do you think the Trump administration, the Trump White House, will be at the sight of Putin and Xi side by side on Russia's Victory Day with an implied criticism of American hegemony?
Right. I think they should be very concerned about this because one of the calculations of the Trump administration was, well, if we mend relations with Russia, if we don't criticize Russia, we take it very easy with them, then somehow we can wean Russia away from China. It's clearly not the case. You got those two leaders next to each other on the dais today. You had Xi Jinping, as you've alluded to, talking about in very stark terms about American hegemony and criticizing the United States. And Putin, although his criticism has been somewhat softer in the past few weeks, still talking about, we can get this done. You know, the slogan used to be in these parades, never again, no war again. And now it is, we can do it again. So I think they should be concerned about this because what we saw today was a reassertion of this Chinese-Russian partnership, really almost like an alliance.
Yep. And we heard from the Oval Office this week that President Trump is a great deal maker, hence the sort of trade deal with the UK. But we have today another leader with whom Trump said he fell in love, the North Korean dictator Kim Jongun, saying our involvement in the Russia-Ukraine war is justified. He said it's an exercise of sovereign rights in defense of a brother nation. How is Trump going to respond to this, the response from the person he said he fell in love with?
Well, I think he probably still thinks he can somehow make a deal with Kim Jong-un and win him over if he offers him more than the Russians are offering him. But there were North Korean troops, although they didn't march in the parade today, they were there on Red Square. Putin greeted them. He praised Kim Jong-un. Kim Jong-un has praised him. And as far as we know, we don't know the details, the North Koreans are already getting quite a lot from the Russians in terms of military assistance in return for them sending their soldiers there. So I think if the Trump administration thinks that it can somehow win Kim Jong-un over, I think it needs to rethink what its strategy would be.
And people who support Trump say he's playing 4D chess and everybody's scrambling to catch up. But when you look at almost every aspect of his foreign policy, from the tariffs to the war in Ukraine to what's happening in Gaza, it doesn't appear to be very coherent. How do you read it?
Well, I think a lot of it is quite impulsive. If there is a strategy there, it's maybe, he says different things. He contradicts himself quite often, and it's to keep people on their toes. First of all, it was 145% tariffs on China. Now there are negotiations that are going to be going on in the next days between the US and China. So I think maybe that is part of the strategy, but I don't think it's producing the results yet that they hoped it would.
All right. Thank you very much indeed to Angela Stent, a former US National Intelligence Officer on Russia and a former Senior NATO Adviser. It's Henry Bonsu on Times Radio.